Welcome back. Another episode of Spicy Tales. We are on chapter 14. I know, I'm excited too. Except it's a nail-biting one because of what took place in the last chapter. All right, let's do this. Comfy clothes, comfy blankets, coffee, garden gummies, whatever. Chapter 14. Western woods, grove of young birch trees, slaughtered chicken, double loop snare, and close to the running water. I repeated Lucien's instructions as I walked out of the manor, through the cultivated gardens, across the wild, rolling grassy hills behind them, over clear streams, and into the spring woods beyond. No one had stopped me. No one had even been around to see me leave. Bow and quiver across my back, Lucien's knife at my side. I lugged along a satchel stuffed with a freshly dead chicken, courtesy of the baffled kitchen staff. And I had tucked an extra blade into my boot. The lands were as empty as the manor itself, though I occasionally glimpsed something shiny in the corner. Every time I turned to look, the shimmering transformed into the sunlight dancing on a nearby stream, or the wind fluttering the leaves of a lone sycamore atop a knoll. As I passed a large pond nestled at the foot of the towering hill, I could have sworn I saw 4 shining female heads poking up from the bright water watching me. I hurried my steps. Girl, I would too. I would be trucking it. 100%. Only birds and the chittering and rustling of small animals sounded as I entered the still green western forest. I'd never even ridden through these woods on my hunts with Lucien. There was no path here, nothing tame about it. Oaks, elms, and beeches intertwined in a thick weave, almost strangling the trickle of sunlight that crept in through the dense canopy. The moss-covered earth swallowed any sound that I made. Uh-oh. Old. This forest was ancient and alive in a way that I couldn't describe, but I could only feel deep in the marrow of my bones. Perhaps I was the first human in 500 years to walk beneath these heavy, dark branches, to inhale the freshness of spring leaves, making the damp, thick rot. Birch trees, running water. I made my way through the woods, breath tight in my throat. Night was the dangerous time. I reminded myself I only had a few hours until sunset. Oh, you better hurry. Even if the bogue had stalked us into the daylight, the bogue was dead, and whatever horror Tamlin was now dealing with dwelled in another part of these lands, the Spring Court. I wondered in what ways Tamlin had to answer to its High Lord, or if it was his High Lord who had carved out Lucien's eye. Maybe it was the High Lord's consort, and she, whom Lucien had mentioned, that instilled such fear in them. I pushed away I kept my steps light, my eyes and ears open, and my heart beat steady. Shortcomings or no, I could still hunt. And the answers I needed were worth it. I found a glen of young, skinny birch trees, then stalked in ever-widening circles until I encountered the nearest stream. Not deep, but so wide that I'd have to take a running leap across it. Lucien had said to find running water, and this was close enough to make escape possible, if I needed to escape, and hopefully I wouldn't. I traced and then retraced several different routes to the stream, and a few alternative routes should my access to it somehow be blocked. Love it, strategic. And when I was sure of every root and rock and hollow in the surrounding area, I returned to the small clearing encircled by those white trees, and I laid my snare. From my spot up in a nearby tree, a sturdy, dense oak whose vibrant leaves hid me entirely from anyone below, I waited and waited. The afternoon sun crept overhead, hot enough even though the canopy that I had to shrug off my cloak, and I had to roll up my sleeves of my tunic. My stomach grumbled, and I pulled a hunk of cheese out of my rack-sack. Eating it would be quieter than the apple. I'd also just swiped from the kitchen on my way out. When I finished it off, I swigged water from the canteen I'd brought, parched from the heat. Did Tamlin or Lucien ever grow tired of day after day of eternal spring, or ever venture into other territories? If only just to experience a different season? I wouldn't have minded endless mild spring while looking after my family, because winter brought us dangerously close to death every year. But if I were immortal, I might want a little variation to pass the time. I'd probably want to do more than lurk about a manor house, too. Though I still hadn't worked at the nerve to make the request that had crept into the back of my mind when I saw that mural. I moved about as much as I dared on the branch, only to keep the blood flowing to my limbs. I just settled in again when a ripple of silence came toward me. Uh-oh. As if the wood thrushes and squirrels and moths had held their breath while something passed by. My bow was already strung. Quietly, I loosely nocked an arrow. Closer and closer, the silence crept. The trees seemed to lean in, their intertwined branches locking tighter, a living cage keeping up the smallest of birds from soaring out of the canopy. Maybe this had been a very bad idea. Maybe Lucian had overestimated my abilities. Or maybe he had been waiting for the chance to lead me to my doom. My muscles strained from holding still atop of that branch, but I kept my balance and I listened. And then I heard it, a whisper, as if cloth were dragging over root and stone, a hungry, wheezing sniffing from the nearby clearing. I'd laid my snares carefully, making the chicken look as if it had wandered too far and snapped its own neck as if it sought to free itself from a fallen branch. I'd taken care to keep my own scent off the bird as much as possible, but these fairies had such keen senses, and even though I'd covered my tracks, there was a snap, a whoosh, and a hollowed-out, wicked scream that made my bones and muscles, and another enraged shriek pierced the forest, and my snares groaned as they held and held and held. I climbed out of the tree and went to meet the cereal. Lucian, I decided, as I crept into the fairy and the birch glen, really, truly wanted me. I hadn't known what to expect as I entered the ring of white trees, tall and straight as pillars. But it was not that tall, thin, veiled figure in dark, tattered robes. Its hunched back was facing me. I could count the hard knobs of its spine poking through the thin fabric, spindly. Scabby gray arms clawed at the snare with yellow, cracked fingernails. Run! Some primal, intrinsically human part of me whispered and begged. Run and never look back. But I kept my arrow loosely nocked. I said quietly, "Are you one of the cereal?" The fairy went rigid and sniffed once and then twice. Then slowly it turned to me. The dark veil draped over its bald head, blowing in a phantom breeze. A face that looked like it had been crafted from dried, weather-worn bone, its skin either forgotten or discarded, a lipless mouth and two long teeth held by blackened gums, slitted holes for nostrils, and eyes that were nothing more than swirling pits of milky white, the white of death, the white of sickness, the white of clean-picked corpses. Peeking above the ragged neck of its dark robes was a body of veins and bones, as dried and solid and horrific as the texture of its face. It let go of the snare, and its two long fingers clicked against one another as it studied me. "Human," it said, and its voice was at once one and many, old and young, beautiful and grotesque. My bowels turned watery. Mine would too. I'd vomit. "Did you set this clever, wicked trap for me? Are you one of the cereal?" I asked again, my words scarcely more than a ragged breath. "Indeed, I am," went its fingers against each other, one for each word. "Then the trap was for you," I managed. "Run." It remained sitting, its bare, gnarled feet caught in my snares. "I have not seen a human woman for an age. Come closer so that I might look upon my captor." I did no such thing. I let out a huffing, awful laugh. "And which of my brethren betrayed my secrets to you?" "None of them. My mother told me stories of you." "Lies, lies. I can smell the lies on your breath." It sniffed again, its fingers clacking together. It cocked its head to the side in an erratic, sharp movement, the dark veil snapping with it. "What would a human woman want from the cereal?" "You tell me," I said softly. It let out another low laugh. "A test, a foolish and useless test. For if you dared to capture me, then you must want knowledge very badly." I said nothing, and it smiled with that lipless mouth, its grayed teeth horrifically large. "Ask me your questions, human, and then free me." I swallowed hard. "Is there Is there truly no way for me to get home? Not unless you seek to be killed and your family with you. You must remain here. Whatever last shred of hope I'd been clinging to, whatever foolish optimism shriveled and died. This changed nothing. Before my fight with Tamlin that morning, I hadn't even entertained the idea anyway. Perhaps I'd only come here out of spite. So fine. If I was here, facing sure death, then I might as well learn something. What do you know about Tamlin? More specific, human. Be more specific. For I know a good many things about the High Lord of the Spring Court. The earth tilted beneath me. Tamlin is a High Lord? Click, click, click. You did not know. Interesting. Not just some petty fairy lord of Manor, but a High Lord of one of the 7 territories? A High Lord of Prythian. Did you also not know that this is the Spring Court, little human? Yes, I knew about that. The cereal settled on the ground. Spring, summer, autumn, winter, dawn, day, and night. It mused as if it hadn't even answered. The 7 courts of Prythian, each ruled by a High Lord, all of them deadly in their own way. They are not merely powerful, they are. That was why Tamlin had been able to face the Bogue and live. He was a High Lord. I tucked away my fear. Everyone at the Spring Court is stuck wearing a mask, and yet you aren't. Are you not a member of the court? I am a member of no court. I am older than the High Lords, older than Prythian, older than the bones of this world. Lucian had definitely overestimated my abilities. And what can be done about this blight that has spread in Prythian, stealing and altering the magic? Where did it come from? Stay with the High Lord, human. That's all you can do. You will be safe. Do not interfere. Do not go looking for answers after today, or you will be devoured by the shadow over Prythian. He will shield you from it, so stay close to him, and all will be righted. That wasn't exactly an answer. I repeated, where did the blight come from? Those milky eyes narrowed. The High Lord does not know that you came here today, does he? He does not know that his human woman came to trap a cereal, because he cannot give her the answers that she seeks. But it is too late, human, for the High Lord, for you, perhaps for your realm as well, despite all that it had said. Despite its order to stop asking questions and stay with Tamlin, it was his human woman that echoed in my head. That made my teeth clench. But the serial went on. Across the violent western sea, there is another fairy kingdom called Hybern, ruled by a wicked, powerful king. Yes, a king, not a High Lord. There, his territory is not divided into courts. There, he is law unto himself. Humans no longer exist in that realm, though his throne is made of their bones. That large island I'd seen on the map, the one that hadn't yielded any lands to humans after the treaty, and a throne of bones. The cheese I'd eaten turned lead in my stomach. For some time now, the king of Hybern has found himself unhappy with the treaty the other ruling high fae of the world made with you humans long. He resents that he was forced to sign it, to let his mortal slaves go, and to remain confined to his damp green isle at the edge of the world. And so, 100 years ago, he dispatched his most trusted and loyal commanders, his deadliest warriors, remnants of the ancient armies that he once sailed to the continent to wage such a brutal war against you humans. All of them as hungry and vile as he. As spies and courtiers and lovers, they infiltrated the various high fae courts and kingdoms and empires around the world for 50 years. And when they had gathered enough information, he made his plan. But nearly 5 decades ago, one of his commanders disobeyed him. The deceiver, and the cereal straightened. We are not alone. I drew my bow farther, but kept it pointed at the ground as I scanned the trees. But everything had gone silent in the presence of the cereal. Human, you must free me and run, it said, those death-filled eyes widening. Run for the High Lord's manor. Do not forget what I told you. Stay with the High Lord and live to see everything righted. What is it? If I knew what came, I could stand a better chance of the Naga. Fairies, made of shadow and hate and rot. They heard my scream and they smelled you. Free me, human. They will cage me if they catch me here. Free me and return to the High Lord's side. Shit. I lunged for the snare, making to put away my bow and grab my knife. But 4 shadowy figures slipped through the birch trees so dark that they seemed made from a starless night. Oh my gosh, you won't believe it. That was the end of chapter 14. But I tell you what, let's jump to chapter 15. All right, let's go. The Naga were sprung from a nightmare, covered in dark scales and nothing more. They were a horrendous combination of serpentine figures and male humanoid bodies whose powerful arms ended in polished black, flesh-shredding talons. Here were the creatures of the blood-filled legends, the ones that slipped through the wall to torment and slaughter mortals. The ones I would have been glad to kill the day in the snowy woods. Their huge almond-shaped heads took the cereal and me. The 4 of them paused across the clearing, the cereal between us, and I trained my arrow toward the one in the center. The creature smiled, a row of razor sharp teeth greeting me as a silvery forked tongue darted out. Ugh, vomit. The Dark Mother has sent us a gift today, brothers, he said, gazing at the cereal, who was clawing at the snare now. The Naga's amber eyes shifted toward me again. And a meal. Not much to eat, another one said, flexing its claws. I began backing away toward the stream, toward the manor below, keeping my arrow pointed at them. One scream from me would notify Lucian, but my breath was thin, and he might not come at all. If he'd sent me here, I kept every sense fixed on my retreating steps. Human, the cereal begged. I had 10 arrows, 9. Once I fired the one knocked in my bow. None of them mashed, but maybe they'd keep the Naga down long enough for me to flee. I backed away another step. The 4 Naga crept closer, as if savoring the slowness of the hunt, as if they already knew how I tasted. I had 3 heartbeats to make up my mind. 3 heartbeats to execute my plan. I drew my bowstring back farther, my arm trembling, and then I screamed. Sharp and loud with every bit of air in my 2 tight lungs. With the Naga now focused entirely on me, I fired at the tether holding the cereal in place. The snare shattered like a shadow on the wind. The cereal was off. A blast of dark that set the 4 Naga stag. The one closest to me surged toward the cereal, the strong column of its scaly neck stretching out. No chance of my movements being considered an unprovoked attack anymore. Not now that they'd seen my aim. They still wanted to kill me. So I let my arrow fly. The tip glittered like a shooting star through the gloom of the forest. I had all of a blink before it struck home and blood sprayed. The Naga toppled back just as the remaining 3 whirled to me. I didn't know if it was a killing shot. I was already gone. I raced for the stream using the path I'd calculated earlier, not daring to look back. Lucian had said he'd be nearby, but I was too deep in the woods, too far from the manor and help. Branches and twigs snapped behind me, too close, and snarls that sounded like nothing I'd heard from Tamlin or Lucian or the wolf or any animal filled the still woods. My only hope of getting away alive lay in outrunning them long enough to reach Lucian, and then only if he was there he'd promised to be. I didn't let myself think of all the hills I would have to try and climb once I cleared the forest itself, or what I would do if Lucian had changed his mind. The crashing through the brush became louder and closer, and I veered to the right, leaping over the stream. Running water would have stopped to the cereal, but a hiss and a thud close behind me told me it did nothing to hold the Naga at bay. I careened through a thicket, and thorns ripped at my cheeks. I barely felt their stinging kisses or their warm blood sliding down my face. I didn't even have time to wince, not as 2 dark figures flanked me, closing in to cut me off. My knees groaned as I pushed myself harder, focusing on the growing brightness of the wood's end. But the Naga to my right rushed at me, so fast that I could only leap aside to avoid slashing talons. I stumbled but stayed upright just as the Naga on my left. I hurled myself into a stop, swinging my bow up in a wide arc. I nearly lost my grip as it connected with the serpentine face and bone crunched with a horrific screech. I hurled over his enormous fallen body, not pausing to look for the others. I made it 3 feet before the 3rd Naga stepped in front of me. I swung my bow at his head, and he dodged it. The other 2 hissed as they came up behind me, and I gripped the bow harder. surrounded. I turned in a slow circle, bow ready to strike. One of them sniffed at me, those slitted nostrils flaring. "Scrawny human thing," he spat to the others, whose smiles grew sharper. "Do you know what you've cost us?" I wouldn't go down without a fight, without taking some of them with me. "Go to hell," I said, but it came out in a gasp. They laughed, stepping nearer. I swung the bow at the closest. He dodged it, chuckling. "We'll have our sport, though you might not find it as amusing." Uh-oh. I gritted my teeth as I swung again. I would not be hunted down like a deer among wolves. I would find a way out of this. A black claw hand closed around the shaft of my bow, and a resounding snap echoed through the two silent woods. The air left my chest in a whoosh, and I only had time to half turn before one of them grabbed me by the throat and hurled me to the ground. He pounded my arms so hard against the earth that my bones groaned and my fingers splayed, dropping the remnants of my bow. "When we're done ripping off your skin, you'll wish you hadn't crossed into Prithian." He breathed into my face, the reek of carrion shoving down my throat. I gagged. "We'll cut you up so fine there won't be much for the crows to pick at." A white-hot flame went through me. Rage or terror or wild instinct, I don't know. I didn't think. I grabbed the knife in my boot and slammed it into his leathery neck. Blood rained down onto my face, into my mouth as I bellowed my fury, my terror. I slumped back. I scrambled up before the remaining two could pin me, but something rock-hard hit my face. I tasted blood and soil and grass as I hit the earth. Stars danced in my vision, and I stumbled to my feet again, out of instinct, grabbing for Lucien's hunting knife. "Not like this. Not like this. Not like this." One of them lunged for me, and I dodged aside. His talons caught in my cloak and yanked, ripping it into ribbons just as his companion threw me to the ground, my arms tearing beneath his claws. "You'll bleed," one of them panted, laughing under his breath at the knife I lifted. "We'll bleed you nice and slow." He wiggled his talons, perfect for deep, brutal cutting. He opened his mouth again, and a bone-shattering roar sounded through the clearing, only it hadn't come from the creature's throat. "Oh, shit. It's going down." The noise hadn't finished echoing before the naga went flying off of me, crashing into a tree so hard that the wood cracked. I made out the gleaming gold of his mask and hair and the long, deadly claws before Tamlin tore into the creature. The naga holding me shrieked and released his grip, leaping to his feet as Tamlin's claws shredded through his companion's neck. Flesh and blood ripped away. I kept low to the ground, knife at the ready, waiting. Tamlin let out another roar that made the marrow of my bones go cold and reveal those lengthened canines. The remaining creature darted for the woods. He got only a few steps away before Tamlin tackled him, pinning him to the earth and disemboweled the naga in one deep. I remained where I lay, my face half buried in the leaves and twigs and moss. I didn't even try to raise myself. I was shaking so badly that I thought I would fall apart at the seams. It was all I could do to keep holding the knife. Tamlin got to his feet, wrenching his claws out of the creature's abdomen. Blood and gore dripped from them, staining the deep green moss. High Lord, High Lord, High Lord. Feral rage still smoldered in his gaze, and I flinched as he knelt beside me. He reached for me again, but I jerked back away from the bloody claws that were still out. I raised myself into a sitting position before the shaking resumed. I knew I couldn't get to my feet. "Feyre," he said. The wrath faded from his eyes, and the claws slipped back into his skin. But the roar still sounded in my ears. There had been nothing in that sound but primal fury. "How?" It was all I could manage to say, but he understood me. "I was tracking a pack of them. These four escaped and must have followed your scent through the woods. I heard you scream." So he didn't know about the cereal, and he'd come to help me? He reached a hand toward me, and I shuddered as he ran cool, wet fingers down my stinging, aching cheek. Blood. That was blood on them. And from this stickiness on my face, I knew there was already enough blood splattered on me that it wouldn't make a difference. The pain in my face and my arm faded and then vanished. His eyes darkened a bit at the bruise I knew was already blossoming on my cheekbone, but the throbbing quickly lessened. The metallic scent of magic wrapped around me and then floated away on a light breeze. "I found one dead half a mile away," he went on, his hands leaving my face as he unbuckled his baldric, then shucked off his tunic and handed it to me. The front of my own had ripped and torn by the talons of the naga. I saw one of my arrows in his throat, so I followed their tracks. I pulled on Tamlin's tunic over my own, ignoring how easily I could see the cut of his muscles beneath his white shirt. The way the blood soaking it made them stand out even more. I bet it did. A purebred predator, honed to kill without a second thought, without remorse. I shivered again and savored the warmth that leaked from the cloth. High Lord. I should have known. I should have guessed. Maybe I didn't want to. Maybe I'd been afraid. Here, he said, rising to his feet and offering me a blood-stained hand. I didn't dare look at the slaughtered Naga as I gripped his extended hand and he pulled me to my feet. My knees just buckled, but I stayed upright. I stared at our linked hands, both coated in blood that wasn't our own. No, he hadn't been the only one to spill blood just now, and it wasn't just my blood that still coated my tongue. Perhaps that made me as much of a beast as him. But he'd saved me. And killed for me. I spat onto the grass, wishing I hadn't lost my canteen. Do I want to know what you were doing out here? He asked. Nope, definitely not. Not after he'd warned me plenty of times already. I thought I wasn't confined to the house and garden. I didn't realize I'd come so far. He dropped my hand. On the days that I'm called away to deal with trouble, stay close to the house. Cute. I nodded a bit numbly. Thank you. I mumbled, fighting past the shaking racking my body, my mind. The Naga's blood on me became nearly unbearable. I spat again. Not just for this, for saving my life. I mean, I wanted to tell him how much that meant, that the High Lord of the Spring Court thought that I was worth saving, but I couldn't find the words. His fangs vanished. It was the least I could do. They shouldn't have gotten this far onto my lands. Let's go home, he said, sparing me the effort of explaining why he'd been out here in the first place. I couldn't bring myself to tell him that the manor wasn't my home and that I might not even have a home at all anymore. We walked back in silence, both of us blood-drenched and pale. I could still sense the carnage we'd left behind. The blood-soaked ground and trees, the pieces of the Naga. Well, I'd learned something from the serial, at least, even if it wasn't entirely what I wanted to hear or know. Stay with the High Lord. Fine, easy enough. But as for the history lesson, he had been in the middle of giving me about wicked kings and their commanders and however they tied into the High Lord at my side in the Blight. I still didn't have enough specifics to be able to thoroughly warn my family. But the serial had told me not to go looking for further answers. I had a feeling I would surely be a fool to ignore his advice. My family would have to make do with the bare bones of my knowledge, then hopefully it would be enough. I didn't ask Tamlin anything about the Naga, about how many he'd killed before those 4 slipped away. Didn't ask him anything at all, because I didn't detect a trace of triumph in him, but rather a deep, unending sort of shame and defeat. That was the end of chapter 15. It's getting good. Okay, listeners, tune in next time for chapter 16. Bye.